Good morning. I'm Lynn Langit, and today I'm going to talk to you about tech apprenticeships. So I run my own consultancy, and I've done so for many years. And like many people working in tech, one of the big challenges that I have is finding qualified people for all the work that I have. And this has been particularly compelling in the past few years because I'm a cloud architect and I work with big data. Now I work with what I call genomic scale data. I've been working to support cancer research and in this year, COVID research. So I've been extremely busy. So I've had this challenge in my consultancy and also when I contracted and worked for companies, including Microsoft, in finding qualified people for tech jobs. And I've kind of stumbled on this process of tech apprenticeships and found some things that work for me. So I created this talk to share the aspects of working with tech apprentices that have worked in the hopes that this could be useful to the people listening. So first, this idea of apprenticeships. Words actually really matter when we're thinking about finding or growing or adding qualified people to our technical work. My dad, my late father, was a lineman for his entire life. So this isn't, but it could actually be a picture of my late dad. And from him, I learned about how the whole apprenticeship and trades work because that was his life. And as I've been working to find qualified people, I reflected on what I learned from him and how, because he eventually became the regional supervisor and hired people and all that kind of stuff. So he would always talk about working with tools and understanding how to use tools. And in software, of course, our tools are not physical tools, but there are increasingly complex suites of tools. In my world, for example, machine learning is increasingly a component. He would also talk about applying a level of skill to the usage of the correct tool. And of course, the two things together really reflect judgment that only comes with experience. So the challenge for me, and I think for other people who I've talked to who run tech firms, is finding people with these skill sets. And it is really challenging. My situation has been, I have always had more work available than people that I could find to fill those roles. And I've really been, working on this problem, thinking about this problem for many years. This idea of apprenticeships started ringing true for me when my daughter, who's now 21, actually went to preview of university when she was 17. She got the ability to go to Stanford that summer. So I got access to what was being taught to the students because I don't have a CS degree, I'm self-taught. And I found a lot of gaps between what was being taught in CS and what I needed as a cloud architect. Also, I started looking at apprenticeship models in different countries, notably Germany. Actually, this time last year, I was in Germany. I speak German, thanks to my grandma. And as you may or may not know, they continue this tradition of apprenticeships for the trades. That, it really is interesting in terms of the quality of engineers that they're able to build, among other types of skills. So how does this apply? We have all these jobs, we're looking for qualified people. I really kind of just flipped it over and I started really thinking about, okay, rather than, finding perfectly qualified people to match a job description, maybe think about what the person could bring to the table and the particular project, in my case, or contract, and how those things could be matched together. So this will be the controversial part of my talk. For me personally, mentoring doesn't work well to solve this problem. I know that mentoring has a role. I'm a woman in tech, so I know about lack of representation. I'm often the only woman in the room. And I think there's a role and a place for it. But for this particular problem space, I find that working on actual production problems from day one is providing me and the people that I work with a better result. So I personally do not mentor. I don't find value in it. It doesn't work for me. And maybe it's just my own failing, but it's just an approach that I take differently. So as I said, I'm a cloud architect. I've been working solely in the public cloud for many, many years, starting way back 2007, 2011. I actually was a full-time employee at Microsoft when Azure launched and lived in the West Coast at that time, which really led in cloud adoption, and have just seen globally the cloud jobs increasing just exponentially. And I think part of why this particular approach works for my situation is because I do all of my work in the cloud. And the cloud is moving so quickly, so you can't find people who have skills. You basically have to build the people. And I think that's something our industry really needs to embrace, because it's just crazy to me that we have, in the middle of a pandemic, we have all these people out of work, and I have more work than I can hire for. So I feel like we need to think differently about how we prepare and educate and, like I said, build people, because so many of the tech jobs, if not the majority of them, will be cloud jobs. So I get asked all the time, because I work with all the different cloud vendors, I want to get into this. I maybe got some different background. What should I study? What should I learn? The general rule globally is AWS had first mover advantage. So you kind of can't go wrong with AWS as a starting place. However, it's been really interesting as I've traveled around the world that different markets have different needs. And my take on the Twin Cities is that the secondary cloud, or a cloud that there's opportunity, is Azure. And maybe I'm not understanding the market. I've only lived back here for about a year now, but seeing all the Fortune 500 companies and the big retailers who I assume are not on AWS because of competitive situation, I'm just hearing a lot of market need here for Azure. Now, I would contrast that with my work on the West Coast, where GCP was the secondary cloud. So I always advise people to kind of look at the market, look at what jobs are are available, and kind of target your studies on that particular cloud. And it does vary. It really does vary. But when you pick one, study, learn, and if you're new to it, do get certifications. They do help. So the areas that I focus my consultancy on are what I call things that matter. In the beginning of my consultancy, I worked in probably less socially relevant areas like ad tech and fintech, and learned some really important patterns around big data on the cloud. But about 5 years ago, a friend of mine got cancer. She survived, but she was unable to get personalized treatment. And that was actually the summer my daughter was at Stanford, and she was studying bioinformatics. And she came home and she said, "Mom, these people aren't using the cloud." And I said, "You got to be kidding me." So I pivoted about 5 years ago and went into a domain that I do nothing about. So I kind of model this lifelong learning that I'm trying to find in people that I work with, because I've spent a lot of time trying to educate myself and had some good success. I think it also gives me a tolerance for working with people who maybe don't have domain knowledge but have passion. And in this year in particular, with the COVID research accelerating worldwide, again, I have more work than I can do. So the point of this is focus on the passion and put your energy there. It's not so important that you start with a huge background if you're willing to do the work. So I also work in education. I've had a nonprofit for many years that I've handed off that provides resources for school teachers to get kids introduced to a kids version of Java for 8th graders, basically. And I have a pilot going now in California where all the schools are closed because of COVID around that. So again, the reason I'm mentioning this is the kinds of projects that I work on are really varied. And so I don't have domain knowledge about all this stuff. And so when I bring people on, I work with them with the subject matter experts to get the domain knowledge so we can build technical solutions that are relevant to them. Earth, I am the first advisor to a startup that is trying to consumerize climate actions in the United States called Carbon Down. And so I've been really learning a lot about carbon sequestration this year, a topic I knew nothing about before 2020, and it's fascinating. And then just kind of, it's almost ancillary access. I am a woman in tech. I am often the only one in the room, sadly, even after 15 years of this. So I'm continuing to fight the good fight, and I'm constantly looking to bring people to work with me who maybe have different backgrounds. I don't have a CS degree. I have a linguistics degree. I taught myself to code when I was 38 years old. So I really don't subscribe to that you're too old to, or you're too anything not to do something. So how do I find these potential apprentices? I don't have any sort of traditional marketing. I don't have job posts or anything like that. I do things like this. I talk. And as you probably figured out, one of the reasons I'm doing this is I actually am looking for some more apprentices. So because I've got some contracts coming up. So one of the first ways that I've had some good success is I volunteered to judge competitions. And it is so much fun. Everything from middle school all the way up to graduate level at the university. And I get involved and judge these competitions, and I often offer the winning teams the opportunity to intern with me or audition or apprentice with me. And I've had some really amazing success with some of these young students. It's been really just very gratifying what we build together. Another place that I find people that might want to work with me is through my audience for LinkedIn Learning. I'm a LinkedIn Learning author. I have 30 courses in the library and around a viewership of around 4 million viewers. Not every student sends me an email, thank goodness, but a lot of students do. And I work really, really hard to try to answer as many of the questions. And students who are a little bit more ambitious might research a little bit about me and understand that I do take on apprentices, and they will actually reach out to me and say, I understand you do this. I'm interested in doing it. And again, I've had some really good success from some of my learners. And then startups. Also, I've been involved in the startup community since I worked at Microsoft in California and globally. So I find people at startups. So when I look at people who are interested in working with me, I really don't pay much attention to a resume. I have these controversial approaches to working with people. I look at if they have any visibility. Now, not everybody does, but you notice there's a spectrum of this. And new basically could be young. Because I actually look to see if they have a TikTok. I don't have a TikTok, but there are some people that do some pretty interesting things on TikTok. Now, this is not a deal breaker. Some people, maybe they're career changers, maybe they work in a corporation, they don't have any public visibility. So I'll ask them to show me projects or parts of projects that they're interested in. And an example of looking at a subset of people that I might work with and really considering circumstances, unfortunately, kind of sadly, as of last year, only a little over 5% of the contributions to GitHub were women. So if I have a woman coming to talk to me about apprenticing, if she happens to have something on GitHub, I'm actually thrilled, but I don't usually expect that because of the skewed ratio. Now, to be clear, if we can, we put a lot of our work up on there. So that's part of how it goes when we work together, and we get, more underrepresented people up in GitHub, which I think is really important. So what do I look for in people that I'm going to work with? You might be surprised. It is not Python or Node or a CS degree. It is this: kindness. I have this crazy idea that software and software solutions are built for people, and that as engineers, we have to have empathy for our users. So do I like having a conversation with the person? Are they a good listener? Do they ask questions? Are they, comfortable? Growth mindset. Linda Rising from the Agile community did an amazing talk that I highly recommend. I should link it here, on Carol Dweck's work. Carol Dweck is a scientist that wrote, social scientist, about the ability to learn. And she did a bunch of experiments about with children, adults, what it takes to be able to be a lifelong learner. And the very short TLDR is a growth mindset. So if this is a new concept to you, Google it. It's life-changing. was for me when I discovered it a few years ago. And curiosity. I always say to people, if they say, well, I'm not technical, I'm not this, I'm not that, I say, are you the person that when you first learned how to drive, you wanted to open and look under the hood and kind of just see like what was going on there? Or are you a person that has a stick shift car? Did you guys know that there is a correlation between engineers and stick shift cars? And if you're wondering, I do not have one anymore, but I did have one. So I believe, really based on my own life, that anyone can learn anything they want to at any time. And so if the person is kind and empathetic, believes that themselves, and has a curiosity, I've had really good success with people from very non-traditional backgrounds, building parts of solutions for COVID research. So it can be done. So what does it look like? Well, we prepare to work. Now, I don't do interviews. So what I do when I'm going to work with somebody is we get on the call, everything's remote. It was even before COVID for me. And we just start working on something. And it's usually something really easy because the idea is just to get used to working together. So it might be, editing Markdown on a GitHub documentation, or it might be writing up user requirements on a Word doc, or it might be editing a really simple Python or Node script. Just anything that is actually technical. It's kind of a throwaway thing. Do a lot of hello worlds. Maybe run through a tutorial together. Just say, what are you interested in? Oh, you want to do this machine learning on images? Let's try that out. That might be fun. So once we sort of get through that, so you have to have, the remote client and the software IDE and the runtimes and all the stuff you have to do to get ready to work. Then we work. So when people come to apprentice with me after a very short, probably 1 or 2 sessions, maybe 1 or 2 hours, we go right into work. And, we just start working on projects. And one of the things that's been so fantastic is I try to have beginner's mind, but you lose it really quickly as you get domain knowledge. And I am a firm believer that staying close to your customer and delivering them solutions that add value to their life requires that you have the customer perspective, and that requires you have beginner's mind. You have to see it from the eyes of the customer. So one of the big values that I get with working with the apprentices who often don't have any domain knowledge is they'll ask the naive questions like, is this really useful? And those are so important. Plus they work really, really hard. They work really hard. I have to say, I'm just always amazed at how hard the people that I'm privileged to be able to work with, how much effort they put in, and the things we build they amaze me. So at some point they graduate because I don't hire anybody full-time. It's a contract basis. And so I have a lot of people sort of coming through, as I would say. One of my longest apprentices worked with me for 3 years off and on. Well, he finished his undergrad, he went to grad school, and then he got a full-time job in Silicon Valley. So that was really exciting. Some people work with me a couple months. It's really project-based and sort of what goes on in their life. So if I do any sort of mentoring, if you will, it's at the end here because I know the capabilities of the person, because we've worked on stuff. And I'll often, run them through mock interviews. We can do the dreaded whiteboards together, that kind of stuff. One of the things I'm really proud of is everybody who's worked with me, probably, 15, 20 people over the years, they have all gotten full-time jobs in tech. And it's a really small data sample, but it's just the most gratifying thing. It really, really is. So what does the work look like? I summarized it here. I have written this in more detail, which I'll show you in a minute, but I summarized it. So as I said, it's collaboration. We work on real projects. It's remote. It's always been remote. We use cutting edge tools. For example, for the K through 12 situation, we're using GitHub Codespaces, which are browser-based IDEs. And I just worked with an apprentice on building a custom IDE, which is a Docker container for the K through 12 example. Build and teach. I call my consultancy when people say, what do you do? I say, I learn, I build, and I teach. I have the teacher gene. I just can't help myself. When I build something that provides value to people, I have to write about it. I have to share it. And anyone should ask any question. because that's how we make it better. Time blocking. I am not a big believer in working 8 hours a day. I'm a big believer in working sessions that go from 1 to 2 hours, maybe 2 or 3 sessions a day. They're very intense. We're working really, really hard. And we try to have a challenge, like what do we want to accomplish? Also, I'm a big believer in sort of following the rhythm of the person's life. Like, I've worked with single moms with little kids, and, sometimes they're like, I want to work at 6 a.m. because that's the only time I have. Fine, I don't care. That's something that is just really an advantage that I have being a consultant. I can have the time whenever. I have worked with people in Africa. I've worked with people in Australia. It's the middle of the night. I don't really care. It's the quality of the person. The only thing is I usually don't work before 10 o'clock in the morning. So I made an exception for you guys because I like you so much. So hopefully I'm still doing okay, even though it's before my normal start time. When I work on a paid contract, then I pay my apprentices. So my rule of thumb is if we're doing something that we're both just passionate about for learning purposes, then neither one of us is getting paid. But if I have a paid contract, then I'm paying them, which gives them a great thing to add to their resume as well. And it makes us take the work more seriously. So my first story is a guy that I met at a competition, Matthew Jones, and he is the guy who worked with me for 3 years. One of the things that I'm really proud of that we built was a custom Docker image that we deployed on Amazon as a example, as a hello world. It was the BLAST utility, which is the binary sequence aligner, blah, 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 bioinformatics with the Jupyter notebook. The situation was there really wasn't a reference container that ran in 5 minutes. Believe it or not, in bioinformatics, the first thing I was shown took 5 hours, the hello world. I was like, what? No. So we did lots of things, but he is now he just got his master's, and he's employed full-time in Silicon Valley as a data scientist. And he said, absolutely, the cloud experience is what got him the job in addition to his education, which is just so exciting. So I've written a series of posts about this process because it's hard to distill this into this short of a talk. So they're all linked here. So yes, I use the word intern because that's what people usually start with. But what I'm really saying is apprentice with me. That's what really this article is. So this process includes articles on pair programming, on learn, build, teach, on when you're graduating, how to anti-interview. Came out of a conversation I had in Berlin, actually, how to remote pair program, and then how to have partnerships with the big cloud vendors to be advantageous in your career. So my next apprentice is one I'm working with now. Her name's Kelly. She's a K-12 teacher. She's a high school STEM teacher in Michigan, and she's a single mom. She's wanting to make a transition into tech because of money, basically, and because she loves working in purely tech. So she worked with me on something for the Broad Institute at MIT and Harvard. They have a library called Cromwell, which is designed to scale up their genomics pipelines effectively on different environments, whether it's HPC on-prem clusters or on the cloud. And Microsoft did a reference architecture in Azure, and the Broad was interested in understanding how it worked. They had published it on GitHub. So Kelly and I went through Microsoft's sample, and she drew an architecture, and we wrote an article on Medium together about it to help her to build her portfolio as she goes through interview processes. So that was, and we're doing other stuff too, but that was really gratifying and fun. So speaking of skills, obviously we're working on technical stuff. So programming, UI, UX, machine learning, which is the big for me, and DevOps. Nobody has all this. Like nobody has all this. I don't have all this. So, this continual learning process and building ourselves and building our people is really part of how we become excellent. One of the things I said in the description to this talk was what skills you need. And yes, you need cloud. And yes, you need to learn some scripting language or something. But I honestly think those are not the hard parts. The hard part's machine learning, in my experience. And I know I got to get wrapping up here, but I'm going to just talk about this story quick, because it's kind of cool. So I met Ada as one of my learners. She's from Kenya. She's an Android developer, and she was feeling like she only knew code and she didn't know those other things. So she took on the task of reviewing an open source course for me, GCP for bioinformatics, and provided lots and lots of value and added to her skills. So part of that, both Ada and I worked on machine learning. And one of the advantages that I have being connected to all these students is sometimes I get the advantage of the Ivy Leagues without going there. So one of my people that I work with is Ian, and Ian is a senior at Stanford. And so he's going through all the Stanford math. So we literally trade math for tech. So I teach him cloud, he teaches me math. And it's been a really, really great collaboration. Also, I did join the board of his Stanford startup, Carbon Down, which has been really interesting. So I'm running slim on time, so I'm going to get to the wrap-up part. These are just various things I've done with fantastic people all over the world. And like I said, this is self-serving. I want more apprentices. I've got some really cool contracts coming up, and I'm just taking them, and I don't have enough people. So I live in North Loop. I'm local, and I co-work at Spaces. I'm not there every day. And best way to reach me is on Twitter. So, I hope you found this useful. I hope there was something that you can apply. And if you are interested in potentially apprenticing with me, please reach out. Thanks very, very much to all the team at MinneStar for inviting me. And again, I hope that you enjoyed this talk.